can do.
Okay, so we are part 2 of rabbinic titles and honorifics. Now, again, this sheer, on a very simplistic level, it's about exploring the different kinds of titles that rabbis have had and the backlash, the opposition to this development throughout Jewish history. But more deeply, we want to get to like the values driving behind respect for authority in Jewish tradition, issues of modesty, perhaps. Of course, as we all like to point out, modesty isn't just limited to the length of a woman's skirt, but it has to do with someone's general persona as well. And they're not mutually exclusive, obviously, in halakha, but we're talking about the latter tonight. So if you are following in the source sheet, you can turn to page number 5, source number 11. What we left off last time was we looked at a tshuva from Rabbi Kiva Eger. Sorry, actually not a tshuva from Rabbi Kiva Eger. It's in the tshuvas of Rabbi Kiva Eger, but in the introduction, where his, not students, his children copied his request that they shouldn't include the titles that were given to him when people asked him questions, because it could lead to a few things. The 3 things that he mentioned were, number 1, avak chanufa. It's, first of all, the person writing it violates flattery. You're trying to flatter someone. You're trying to butter them up with all those titles. The second issue of midos is that for the recipient of these honorifics, it can lead toward avak geus. It can lead to pride and arrogance. And the third one is also if the recipient isn't happy, right? If he is very happy with the results of all the honorifics that were piled on, then okay, then he's going to have arrogance. And if he's not happy with his perceived lack of honorifics, what's that going to lead to? Sinas chinam. That's going to lead to baseless hatred. Like, oh, you only called me Hagon Harav, not Hagon Harav Eloi. Not a Meforsa, so you left out one of his titles, so he'll have a whole fit over it. So these are the kind of things that Rabbi Akiva Eger pointed out, and that's why he said, look, at the end of the tshuva, he says, either you call someone Hagon or you call him Harav, but no Hagon or Rav business, 1 title per person, that's it, done. So that was Rabbi Akiva Eger. And unfortunately for Rabbi Akiva Eger's theoretical suspicion was unfortunately realized by Rav Medini, who's the Stei Chemed. The Stei Chemed writes, if you look in source number 11, in the underline in column number 1, there was a rabbi who sent me this happens many times. You'll look in Svarim, and at the beginning of a sefer, there will be a list of approbations, of endorsements from different rabbanim, haskamos. So someone sent his sefer or Chidushei Torah to the Stei Chemed, and the Stei Chemed, he said back to him, "Ubodi love ki lo haya li pnai la'ayin bahem." When I told him I just don't have, I'm writing again. I think it's 9 volumes, 9-volume encyclopedic work, the Stei Chemed. I don't have the time, unfortunately, to thoroughly review your book to the extent that I can either endorse it or not. So, Kosovly, he replied to me when I told him that. He said, this is like really passive aggressive thing. It's okay. I could already tell that you don't really respect me enough, because in your letter that you replied to me, you didn't address me by Hagon. So then the Seichem is like, oh my God, I don't have to, I don't want to, I just want to learn Torah. I don't want to deal with politics, right? So the Seichem, and actually when we learned about Tirchei Tzibura, we talked a little bit about the Stei Chemed's interaction with shul politics. Do you remember the Stei Chemed in Tirchei Tzibura when we learned this a while back? So the Stei Chemed is important because he is a precedent for uprooting a custom of one's shul, uprooting a minhag hamakom for the sake of avoiding and mitigating Tirchei Tzibura. The case is that there was an original synagogue in town that was like the great synagogue of the town. And then, as the community developed, there were smaller shuls that developed. But the minhag always was that if someone is having a simcha that Shabbos, they would leave their backyard minyanim, and then they would come back to the actual shul in town. So the issue is that, they didn't have a simcha room and a chapel and a social hall and a main sanctuary like we do. So there's one minyan in that shul. And what happens is, imagine you have a bar mitzvah and you have someone who's, has an ufraf, and there's this simcha and that simcha that you have to give to people. I imagine this is before we had like acknowledged bas mitzvahs and those kind of things, and simchas bas as well. So, you add all those things in, you have to like make 20 hosafos, add on 20 aliyahs on Shabbos. So the Sdei Chemed said, look, when we established this minhag in our town that every simcha had to take place at this minyan, the founding fathers of our synagogue did not have this in mind, that there should be 20 added aliyahs, 20 hosafos each and every time that we have multiple smachos. So because of that, it's a very lengthy tshuva. Admittedly, I didn't get through the entire thing, but I saw the highlights. And he's like, because of this, we're doing away with it.
Don't put it down.
Which, not with aliyahs in general, but we're doing away with the necessity for everyone to have their simcha at this particular minyan. We don't want to have all these hosafos anymore. So he's like, okay, everyone, you could make a different minyan. We'll add on a new wing to the shul. That way we can accommodate more minyanim. Not everyone has to daven in the main sanctuary. They're just to give you an idea of what it was like. So why did I bring this in? So you can see like the Sdei Chemed already had, like he mentions in that tshuva, I don't call it tshuva. He mentions in that section of Sdei Chemed how he was dealing with the communal politics, because there were these people who he said they couldn't really care more or less about halacha, but like the moment you like change something from the way it was always done, they're like, oh my God, they're not evaluating, what we learned this year over here. Hopefully what we take away is the priorities, importance of halachic principles. So, they're not asking, is this a doraisa? Is it biblically mandated? Is it derabbanan? Is it rabbinically? Is it a minhag? They're not even thinking in halachic categories. They're just like, if this is the way it was always done, this is the way it always has to be. So the Sdei Chemed is like, look, we should evaluate things through a halachic prism and see where halacha leads us, where that takes us. So anyway, that was the Tirchet Tzibura class. He dealt with a little bit of politics over there, where he said it was so bad, I was trying to help my congregation, but my congregation didn't want to help themselves. That was essentially what he wrote. I'll give you the source again from the Tirchet Tzibura class. So anyway, the Sdei Chemed, once again, the poor guy has, like most people in his line of work, needs to fall into politics from time to time. So what he said was, you know what? That's it. I can no longer put up with this. I'm just going to I'm going to give like lavish titles to every single rabbi. That way, no one could be upset with me anymore. The issue was when he went to the opposite extreme of piling on praise for anyone who sent him a letter. What happened was there was a guy who, he wrote some nice divrei Torah, but he definitely was not a Talmud Chacham. He wasn't a Torah scholar. But then, the Sdei Chemed wrote back to him, oh, Yedidi, Hagon, Harav, and he gave him these titles. And then this guy, he gets this letter back from the Sdei Chemed and said, oh my God. And he runs around everywhere showing everyone, hey guys, look at this. The Sdei Chemed called me Hagon, Harav. And then that's basically his endorsement. So he walks around town and everyone's like, oh, this guy must be a huge Talmud Chacham. The Sdei Chemed called him Hagon. So, and now the Sdei Chemed's like, oh my gosh, now I got myself into more trouble. I can't please, he can't please everyone. So no matter what way you go, you're either going to upset people one way or you're going to give too much praise to the other person. It's like, I don't know did I share the story about the guy with the fake smicha certificate? Did I share it last time? Okay, I get, what was that?
You mentioned.
Okay, so I'll tell you the story because I gave the same material, but in one session to the young men's chabura this past Wednesday. So I need to remember who I said what to. So the story my father likes to tell, Zaidi, you've probably heard this one at the Shabbos table in the past. Story that my father likes to tell, it's probably made up, I would hope, is that there's this yeshiva bacher who gets kicked out of high school. And basically, it was a whole to-do. Anytime you expel a student, of course, you want to make sure you've exhausted every form of recourse before having to expel a student permanently from a yeshiva. But alas, it came to that point. So, of course, they wrote up a letter of expulsion. The Rosh Yeshiva, the president, whoever's on the executive, I don't know, however this bureaucracy works, they all sign their names. They put the stamp of the school on there, and they expel the kid with the letter of expulsion, and he needs a copy of the letter of expulsion. What's this kid do? He needs a job, and unfortunately, for a guy like him who needs parnasa, he's a little bit stuck. He didn't get much of a secular education, but he knows how to learn well enough. All those years learning in yeshiva, he figured out how to learn. So what's he do? He takes a flight out somewhere into the middle of America in Yehupitzville. There's a congregation of maybe 30 Jews over there, and he says, hey, I hear you guys need a rabbi. Do you want me to be the rabbi? they're like, yeah, sure, but okay, we have to do a little bit of our due diligence. Can you show us your klaf? Can we see that you have smicha? So what's he do? He pulls out that letter of expulsion written in Hebrew with all the signatures of the Rosh Yeshiva. Oh, I did say this one. All the letters of the Rosh Yeshiva on there and the official stamp of the school. All these poor Balabatim, they just see a Hebrew document that looks very official with a stamp and signatures on there, names of prominent rabbanim. So like, okay, you can be the rabbi of our town now. And so this is basically the issue that the State Chemek got himself into, is that if I give too much praise to people who are undeserving of the title, then you have people who are, I guess, charlatans almost, who present themselves as such, but they really aren't becoming, they shouldn't deserve that title. Now, what's the issue of giving somebody a title if they don't deserve it? Okay, worst case scenario, right? This guy feels good about himself. You know what? Let me give the counter argument. He has so much self-esteem now. He's walking around. He's in seventh heaven. He's on a high that the State Chemek hold him hagon. Why burst his bubble? Let him walk around. Let him feel good about himself, right? We could all use some more self-esteem sometimes. What's wrong with that? Can anyone tell me what could be wrong with that?
Because people will rely on him for important matters. And he's not qualified.
Very good. So Dr. Toby as follows, that if I start giving out titles to people who are undeserving, if I start giving titles out to people, and I call them Hagon Hara, but they're not deserving of it, well, people who don't know any better are going to say, oh, if this guy has a title of a halachic decisior, of a posek, well, who am I to disagree? Apparently, he's someone I could consult on halachic matters. But if this guy doesn't actually know halachic matters well enough to be dispensing psak, then we've got ourselves an issue of possible ziyuf ha-Torah, which is a forgery of Torah. Deliberate or perhaps unwittingly, but nonetheless, it's a huge issue. I can imagine someone asks you a Taras HaMishpacha question. Someone asks you about Hilchos Nida. You're dealing with a possible Isser of Kares, of divine excision. You have to make sure you do your research. You know what you're answering before you give people answers. Think about Shabbos, Chilul Shabbos. Chilul Shabbos. We just learned about the Makoshish Eitzim last week. We learned about the guy who was chopping wood on Shabbos and he gets put to death for violating Shabbos. Violating Shabbos deliberately is punishable by death. So these kind of things are serious, and that's why we don't want to just be bestowing titles on people, because it can lead to terrible consequences. So, okay, good point.
I have to tell you that the school principal that I had in the 7th and 8th grade, who claimed to have a doctorate, when the school board found out that it was a forgery, they fired him.
Okay.
I wound up later
in the academia as well, apparently.
Excuse me, can you ask everybody to mute themselves, please? Hello, mute yourself, everybody. Come on, there's extraneous noise. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Phyllis. Okay, so let's go forward. The Zecher Yehosef in Shastru Zecher Yehosef, which actually he's quoted by State Chemek, so we're not chronologically in order. Looking at source number 12. He makes a very similar point. I actually just put the main points in the title over there so you can easily see it in English. And he says, actually, look, if all the rabbis got together and they decided that we no longer want to accept all these lavish titles, that would be the way that we would deal with this problem once and for all and for good. But I don't know, we apparently, I was talking to someone yesterday. Many years ago, there was an asifa. An asifa means a gathering, a conference to deal with the internet problem. They all met in City Field, and all Jews from all Arbor Confluence of Borough Park and Lakewood got together to demand that we need reform against the internet, whatever that means in per se. I think filters was the main idea. So, why can't we have an asifa where all the rabbis, take a pledge where just call me rabbi, don't call me by any lavish titles, and that's it. If everyone got on board, then that would be the new standard. Oh, okay. Yes. So basically, another Isser that one might be violating here, which I didn't mention yet, thank you for catching it, Toby, is midvar sheker tirchak, the prohibition of telling a lie. Meaning, if I call someone Hagon Harav, but meanwhile, they are not deserving of that title, they've never cracked open a Gemara in their life, then that is not only going to lead people astray, but also it's just sheker. I'm speaking falsehood. This guy is not Hagon Harav if he's never cracked open a Gemara in his life. Now, what are you going to ask based on a previous class that we've learned? Remember when we talked about Kirov and education, Jewish outreach? What we learned was, Erwin, what are you going to say?
You were trying to you had a ringer in the room to to raise the question in order to give in order to mislead him.
Oh, okay. So, right, you remember the scenario, Erwin,
Yeah.
right? The scenario where we had a guy, the class was, the scenario started off, we had a guy planted in the crowd who was going to pretend to be someone who was an atheist. He was going to argue with the rabbi's going to argue back with him. The rabbi would win the argument. And then this guy who was really a rabbi all along, but, he was wearing like ripped jeans or whatever, so they didn't think he was. That's always like the classic t-shirt, ripped jeans, so you're off the dare. So that's so then that guy would say, you know what, Rabbi, you're right. All 613 mitzvos I accept upon myself this moment. And that was their way of like getting all the other people in the room who actually weren't observant and say, this guy who was so anti-Torah accept all 613 mitzvos upon it, and then maybe I should as well. That was a ruse that was asked to Rev Silverstein if one was allowed to do. So to be honest though, Rabbi Zweiter pointed out that to me that a number of these scenarios in Rev Silverstein's books, he thinks actually are just made up for the fun of it. So hopefully no one ever actually asked that question.
Which book are you talking
The
about?
Harivna.
Oh.
That's the book. So, okay.
Same Silverstein as Olego Shabbat or no?
Yeah, same one. So just bring it back. Okay, bring it back in over here. It's a little difficult. I'm sorry. I know there are people on the screen here. There are people over here in real life. So trying to make sure everyone hears what everyone's saying. So the reason I bring it up is because there's a sheet of the Rambam. It seems to be a sheet of the Rambam that midvar sheker tirchak, the prohibition of telling a lie, is limited to judicial matters. However, and then according to others, it's not limited at all. And then there's a middle approach, which is maybe it's Sefer Yereim, I'm trying to remember, is that it's only prohibited to tell a lie if it causes nezek, if it causes some form of damage. So here, this is certainly damage, because what's going to happen? Well, I'm going to consult someone who's not qualified to answer halachic questions, and think of all the nezek, all the damage I can incur. I mean, I'm going to be violating Shabbos and Taharas Mishpacha and all sorts of different Isurim in the Torah. That'll get me Malchus. That we'll talk. Actually, this Thursday night, we're going to talk about all sorts of the first mission of the third chapter. We talk about all these different kinds of Isurim that get you Malchus. It's going to be a lot of fun. Like all the different Isurim, whether it's, Shabbos, Yom Kippur, sexual morality, Meiser Sheni again. So, okay, just whetting everyone's appetite. So, okay, but be it as it may, the prohibition of sheker, of deceit, might apply here as well. Turning to page number 6. Page number 6, we are going to get to the source that the main source that actually brought me on this journey. So again, I have to give gratitude to Rabbi Cohen and his daughter Adina Cohen for bringing me the B'nai Banim Shuvos from Rav Henkin. Originally, I was just going to teach his tshuva as a standalone tshuva and source number 13 on page 6. But then I just really went down the rabbit hole and, made this whole entire packet over here. So this tshuva got me really into it because I want to point out to you the formulation of Rav Henkin. Rav Henkin writes, first of all, he quotes Rav Akiva Eger, you can see in the middle paragraph, who brings up the issues of flattery, of possibly pride, issues of sinas chinam, basis hatred. But then also he writes, if you look in the last sentence of the middle paragraph, ulefamim yeshvo gam onas mamon. Sometimes there's also a onas mamon means like oppression through money. I mean, it means basically a mekachtos. So if I do a business transaction with you under false pretenses, I overcharge you, that's called onas mamon. So literally if I charge you 1/6, but I think he's using it more generally. Why? So what's going to happen is that, look, there might be a guy that he'll write a sefer, and I wasn't going to purchase that sefer, but then when I see that he's getting accolades and he's getting endorsements and he's getting all these special titles from all these different Jewish institutions and all these big public figures, I'm going to say, you know what? Maybe it's worth buying that guy's book, right? So if you see a book from Moshe Kurtz on the shelf, you're like, who the heck is Moshe Kurtz? But then you see something from some, think of all the big names out there. So you're going to say, oh, well, that person is endorsed by this organization. He's endorsed by this person. He puts all these fancy titles and letters after his name on the book. So maybe I should buy it. But if the guy is a fraud, if he's not actually deserving, if he somehow just like finagled his accolades and he's not really deserving of all these titles and honorifics, then when I purchase that book, I'm purchasing it under false pretenses. I think I'm getting an expert on the topic. Meanwhile, I don't know who I wound up with, So if I want to get like a book on Christian history and I want, okay, I'm not going to call it a specific book. You guys can figure out what it is. So then you run into issues. Okay, but then this is the fun part. And this is where people like me, basically this whole class puts people like me in the line of fire here. That's the whole idea. But people like me are especially put in the line of fire in the last paragraph. So let's actually read it out loud. This is so essential. So remember, Rev Hankin, just to get a little bit of his background, he made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, but he knows the American community. I think it was no, that's Rav Nachum Rabinovich in Charleston, I think. So I think Rav Hankin, was he in Canada or something before then? But basically, he was in North America. He knows the North American rabbinate and its culture. So he writes as follows, and don't pick it, don't say any specific people out loud, or pick me as the target. Ugadol mizo yesh sakana b'medina. We'll get to at the end of it actually. Ugadol mizo yesh sakana b'medina kamo kan shnotam ashera eitzel mizbeach. So he says, the Rahingan says that in our Medina, referring to Eretz Yisrael, referring to Israel, there's an even greater danger where they are, he uses this poetic language of sorts, where he says it's like they are planting an Asherah tree, an idolatrous tree next to the altar of God. That's like harsh formulation there. Ubocher letafkidim rabbanim as she'enam ro'im lakach. And they appoint rabbis who are not worthy of their positions, to these powerful governmental positions, the chief rabbinate positions. Ugobim das habrios betorim. And they deceive the masses by virtue of having all these fancy titles. So when the masses say, oh, wow, look at all these titles this guy has. People, he seems to be an appropriate person to fill this governmental chief rabbinate position. So then it leads to an even greater issue, because over here, think about it, here in America, right? So worst comes to worst, you wind up with a guy like me. So look, what could a pulpit rabbi do already? We could give sermons, and we could try to share Torah in the hopes that people, listen at least half the time. But at the end of the day, we don't have the power to enact governmental policies. But someone who's a chief rabbi, whether it be of Israel in general, or of a particular shkuna, of a neighborhood, well, not neighborhood, but of a city area, municipality, it comes, I don't know the precise parameters, but it comes with a certain level of governmental authority. And if you're putting the wrong guy in that position, it can have catastrophic consequences. And that speaks to, we got Audrey over here, and Toby, and Alex, and forgive me if I'm missing anyone else who's with us, who are part of our Thursday morning class, where we did a whole essay about the chief rabbinate. Actually, we went through a whole essay from Rav Lichtenstein about the chief rabbinate. So, Marina, I see you there as well. So all of our discussion about the chief rabbinate, bear that in mind as we're looking at this. Then just skipping down a little bit. And apparently there was a specific issue that prompted this, that he says, yeah, I've already seen a city where they appointed a rabbi who's not a gadol b'Torah. Afterwards they coronated him with these titles, calling him Gon, Maran. I guess he must have been Sephardi, because that's a Sephardic title, it'd be called Maran, as we know, our Maran David Cohen. And then look at this formulation. This is one of the lines that you want to remember from our two-part shir over here. Hopefully we can finish this in two parts. When we're talking about rabbis who, they don't come up with any particularly novel insights on their own. They're not particularly learned, that they're coming up with new innovative ideas in halacha, and grounded innovative ideas in halacha. They're not writing their own shuvos, or at least not roy. They're not educated enough to write proper tshuvos. Rather, what do, they bring ideas from others. Umashalim, they bring nice parables. Umasios b'tuv tam, they share over some funny stories and jokes. Umoshkim es alev, which apparently appeals to the masses. These people, hein bichlal hamiturgamanim. They aren't rabbis, they are miturgamanim. Very good. So Toby says, what's a miturgaman? Literally, a miturgaman is a translator. A miturgaman in the times of the Talmud wasn't literally just a translator. Sometimes it meant translator, like translate language, as it sounds like. But also what a miturgaman can mean that there was a Torah scholar, but many times you look around the world, the people who are the most intelligent and scholarly, very few of them also are proficient orators. So what would happen is you would have a person, you have a Gadol Hador who is very scholarly, very learned, and you would have someone who was a Maturgaman who had very proficient oratory skills, but also like learned enough that he could then understand the idea from the scholar and then present it in a very simple and appealing manner for the broader audience. So what Rav Hankin's saying is many of these people, they're not really like a rabbi from the times of the Gemara, the people we're calling rabbis today, but really they actually are, they're good guys. They're sharing Torah, but they are miturgamanim. They are, a translator. They're orators who are able to share, good parables, like what I just did, right? I shared a good joke. I hope it was a good joke, at least. I shared like a story or a joke to try to spice up the shiur. So what he's saying is, and I was talking to someone else who works in the pulpit, I guess I would say for longer than I have, because I've only been under a year, almost a year now. But someone's been in the pulpit for a number of years and who has studies Rav Hankin a bit and is really Zionist thinkers. And he was pretty confident that Rav Hankin here was not just criticizing the Israeli chief rabbinate, but he was criticizing the American rabbinate as well. So, wow. That's like that's quite a damning formulation right there from Rav Hankin. Let me pause for a moment, and I'll stop talking and being miturgaman for a moment. What do we think? What do we make of all this? What are the input? Again, not you could call me out if you want, but don't call out any other rabbis. What do we make of this practically for what we see around us? Do we agree with Rav Hankin's formulation? Is it overly harsh? Is it accurate? Should we be now from now on, instead of Rabbi Kurtz, it should be miturgaman Kurtz when I get up there? So what do we make of it?
I feel that.
Well, I certainly think.
Sorry. There's just because there's people here. I know you can't hear. So Toby just first, and then Zadie. I know I'll repeat what Toby says to the computer so you guys can hear what she says.
As a generalization, I feel it's harsh.
Okay, so Toby comes to give me some form of consolation and says, in general, I think it's a harsh formulation and not warranted in general, but perhaps in certain circumstances. Okay, so Zadie, what do you have to say?
I think that the title rabbi is appropriate because it's common usage today. And what we expect from our shul rabbis or other leaders, community leaders who have smicha, is that they tell us what the halakha is as having already been formulated. We're not looking to them to come up with new formulations, new ideas. We just want to know what the halakha is as accepted generally by the rabbinate.
Okay. So, my grandfather, without any bias, is also coming to my aid. I'm sure you would have said that even if I wasn't the one giving the shiur over here in the hot seat. So the idea is, I like to think of people who, like myself, who are in pulpit rabbinic positions as, if we use the medical field as an analogy, as general practitioners, where we have a general idea, we have our group of patients, we have our group of congregants who we see to their needs and we look after them. We try to schmooze at them, talk to them. I like to get to know you guys when I'm able to. And the idea is that, the typical kind of things, I could give general advice for general halakhic questions that come my way. But every now and then, for instance, let's say there's an Eruvin question that comes up. So we know how to interact we know which specialists to call up. You know, we could bring in Rabbi Jachter to deal with the Erev, but we also know enough about the particular area that we can converse intelligently with the experts and then come to a conclusion for our general congregation. So I think what my grandfather is saying is the expectation for the average pulpit rabbi is not that they're supposed to be, you know, the next Gadol Hador, but is more of a general practitioner position as opposed to a specialist in every area of Jewish law. Welcome, Melissa. You can join us if you like. So, okay.
There was an observation I'd like to make. Back before the late 1960s, lawyers used to get a degree Bachelor of Law. Then in the late 60s, these law schools started issuing Doctor of Law. They call it Juris Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody who graduated from law school since the late 60s has a Juris Doctor degree. You know, none of us call ourselves doctor.
Right. Very good. Toby, what were you going to say?
A congregation needs a rabbi suitable to who the congregation is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to have a good old Hador in a shul that will remain nameless, you know, is not going to do any good because they're not going to be able to even communicate or understand each other.
Very good.
So,
So what Toby is suggesting is, you know, not just that, you know, supporting my grandfather's point that if we were to have a Gadol Hador as a pulpit rabbi, I mean, I know I'm not going to mention by name, certain people who we consider Gedolim, who earlier in their career, when they were younger guys, they weren't yet a Gadol Hador, so they had to take on pulpit positions or positions teaching at schools, and it didn't really work out so well for them. So yes, certainly that you need someone who's able to have enough baseline knowledge, but also able to work with the general population. Right? It's not good for them, not good for the congregation. Very good. Okay. Anyone else who hasn't had a chance to share any ideas? I just want to make sure we're giving everyone a chance to express themselves. Anyone else have a question? Oliver, yes.
Sort of a question, although I'm not sure, it might be going in a different direction, but let me, the idea of adding titles, aside from it possibly contributing in cases of fraud and misrepresentation, but aside from that, looking to something different. Let's say when I'm thinking of something, okay, something is kosher. Okay, but then now somebody says, oh, but it's not glatt kosher. Okay, it's implying that something's not quite as good as the other. It then creates a kind of a conflict, even though there should be nothing.
Right.
That this sort of, I don't know if that.
Right. We don't want someone undermining the other person's reputation. And actually, I think some of you are on for. I know Susan. Well, Toby, you're for sure on for it. During my interview for the shul, the shir that I chose was actually about that topic. About if one rabbi gives you one psak, can you go to the next rabbi and get a counter psak? So that was actually my brief little shir that I shared during our virtual interview over a year ago at this point. So you know what? It's possible we might need to do chazar on that. You know, I was during an interview. I'm sure there was other things distracting me and everyone else there. So maybe we'll actually slot that for a Monday night class. So Oliver, thank you for bringing that up. Okay, let's go a little bit further, and so we could hopefully have a chance at finishing. Okay, do we rush to finish? Okay, I'll figure it out. Maybe we'll finish on time. We have to finish at 8:15. There's no question. We have mincha. Okay, then on top of what Rav Henkin says, we have an additional qualification. Back to our good old friend Rav Moshe Sternbach. So Rav Moshe Sternbach in Chuvas Hanhagos, source 14. He quotes the Shach, the Beis Yosef, who write that what's the definition of a Torah scholar? Fusheroi lahoros, someone who is qualified to rule on halachic matters. The Yagea b'Torah, and someone who toils in Torah. Meaning, he writes, Nir shetalmid chacham aval rag b'pelpulim vein v'shala ukmei shmais aliv dehilchasol l'nikra talmid chacham. So again, first of all, he writes that if you just spend all your day learning, but you don't actually know halacha l'maisa, you don't know how to take what you learn and apply it to practical circumstances, then there's something lacking in your ability as a Torah scholar, which of course is why I think, we have this Monday night class, is that we take our age-old principles, we try to apply them to nowadays. And then the second thing he writes is, Va'afilu baki, even if this person is an expert, ubal hora, and he knows enough to paskin halacha, if he's squandering his time, if he spends all day playing games on his phone and on the golf course, below yagea b'torah, and he's not, as we say, I think back in Yeshiva, he's not harving in Teda. He's not spending his time toiling and sweating on a sugya and Gemara. Lo ma'agia lo toar Talmud Chacham. Such a person does not earn the title of Talmud Chacham, which again is another issue that the average rabbi needs to reckon with, because the average rabbi, I'll speak for myself. We thankfully, we have time to learn Torah, but you have to find time to learn Torah. That's not the only part of a rabbi's job. There's answering the myriad of emails that you get. There's preparing the Shabbos bulletin. There's going to do, checking the stores for kashrus. There's a lot of things that, involved in the life of a rabbi. So, but Ramosha Shturmach is saying is that in order for someone to be a Talmud Chacham, they also have to spend a significant amount of time, it would seem, toiling in Torah in the Beis Medrash on a regular basis. That's a qualification that he has. So again, it's very difficult for any rabbi who's a rabbi professionally, who we try to make the best of our time to prepare classes that has quality to it. But also, if Rav Shur is saying you have to be a Yagea b'Torah, I mean, again, you could argue, if you have that like hour and a half over there to learn Torah, that is your Yagea b'Torah. But again, it's another qualification that Ramosha Shturbach adds on. But then he actually shares some really nice ideas, which I know I sometimes derisively call them Shabbos morning sermon topics, but these are really nice ideas, and I actually want to share them. So if you look in source 14, you look at the Gra. So he's going to quote three rabbis. One is the Vilna Gaon, then Rav Eliyahu Dessler, and then the Chafetz Chaim, all who support this point. Number one, the Gra says, do we know what a goslin is? We ever hear the term goslin? What's a goslin? A thief. Very good. A goslin is a thief. So what is a thief? A thief isn't simply somebody who one time they shoplifted from grade A, from Stop Shop. They just slipped in the Snickers bar while they're on their way out. That's not what a goslin is. A profession. Meaning if someone steals as their profession, they are called a goslin. Similarly, there's a term for someone who learns Torah called a lamdin. A lamdin isn't someone who does limud, who learns every now and then, but a lamdin is someone who makes their occupation one of studying Torah. That's what makes someone a lamdin, the Gra says. And when I gave the shir over to some of the younger men in the community, Rabbi Kamen was at the shir, and he said to me, yeah, the Lubavitcher Rebbe said the exact same thing, which is like a great case of where you have the Gra, who is a complete opponent of the Hasidim, and you have you have one of the Hasidic Rebbe saying the exact same thing. So I don't know if it's either a very beautiful example of how, look at us, we're all the same people, we can all reach the same conclusions, there's not a lot that separates us, or it's just a case of plagiarism, where someone stole from the other. So you could interpret it very charitably or very cynically. I'll leave that up to you. The
Rabbi?
other, yes, Phyllis.
To fulfill the Liyagea Batorah, so do you have to be a Melamed and a Lamdan? In other words, studying and teaching?
So I don't think you need to actually teach, but however, there is an imperative. I'm forgetting exactly where it's sourced, but essentially, if you know a halacha and someone needs to learn that halacha and you hold that back, that is sinful. So there is an imperative to teach once you are knowledgeable enough to teach, but there isn't, I think, a requirement in order to be considered a Torah scholar. You don't actually have to teach on a regular basis in order to be considered a scholar per se, at least from this formulation here. He says that's important, but he says, Sharoi lahoros. He is ra'oi. He is, what's the right translation for that? He is able, he's deserving, he's qualified to paskin, but it doesn't mean that he actually paskins per se. There's a lot of Rabbanim. I mean, think about Rav Soloveitchik actually. Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, the Rav. The Rav, people would ask him questions. He would paskin when they wanted him to. But you ever wonder, there's Rav Moshe Feinstein, Nicholas Moshe, there's Rav Oldenburg has a Tzitz Eliezer, Rav Vadi Yosef has Yabia Omer, Yechavadas. Why don't we see any shutim, any responsa literature from Rav Soloveitchik? Now, post-mortem, there were people who would take questions they asked for Soloveitchik, and I'm forgetting his name, maybe Rabbi Ziegler. He made this series called The Halachic Positions, Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik. But that wasn't like lichat chila responsa literature. So no one would question that Rav Soloveitchik was qualified to paskin. He didn't see himself as a posek by occupation. He saw himself as a Rosh Yeshiva, which actually that's how the Brisker family worked. Rav Chaim Brisker, again, no one would doubt Rav Chaim Brisker knew enough to paskin. It's very evident. However, there was a dayan, there was a judge in Brisk who would adjudicate cases in the Beis Din. Rav Chaim could be on the court. That's not what he saw himself as his profession. He was a Rosh Yeshiva. So there could be people who are huge Talmidei Chachamim. And that's important also. You don't see them, self-promoting themselves, pushing themselves into the public sphere, but they're, people who are modest, very learned, and generally those are the people like that I like to go to for psak. Okay, now, and just further, if we look further in Shuvos and Hagos, we look further in this piece from Moshe Sternbach, he quotes Rav Dessler, where Rav Dessler, he quotes a Gemara in at the beginning of Baba Basra. Actually, I shared this in a sermon maybe 2.5 months ago. Don't worry, I don't even remember what I spoke about last week, so I'm not holding you guys accountable. So in that sermon, so there was a story where I'm forgetting which rabbi it was, but he fainted in the middle of the Beis Medrash, and when they woke him up, they asked him, "What did you see in your vision when you fainted?" And he answered them. He said, "I saw an upside down world, Olam Hafuch Ra'isi. I saw an upside down world where it was Elyonim Lamata, those who are in this world on top, in the world to come were Lamata, were cast down low. And V'tachtonim Laman, those in this world who were downcast, in the world to come, they were put up on a pedestal and got the recognition that they deserved." So, and then he responds to the person in the Gemara. His father says, "You didn't see an upside down world, but rather what you saw was an olam ha'emes. You saw a true world, a world of justice that reflects what people really deserve and what people earned, and that's what we see in the world to come." But what Rav Dessler interprets this as is he says, "V'zehu el yonim." So turning the page, "V'zehu yonim kan yulamata hasam shel yigu maspek v'tachtonim shechasam kan kishronos avol lamdu biyagia yol yolama." So there'll be people in this world. They're sitting in the Beis Medrash 3 hours. They're cracking their head over a Gemara, trying to understand. I don't get it. Do I classify a tree by its branches? Do I classify it by its trunk? Does it make a difference whether we're talking about Meiser Sheni or Mikla? And they're just like, they're reading through the Gemara, they're reading through the article over and over again. They can't understand it. In the world to come, Hashem doesn't look at how much you do know, but how much we put in to know the Torah that we learn. So even if, one person, they read the Gemara through the first time, they don't need to argue this, right? It's very simple. It's such an obvious Gemara, puts all the pieces together in one shot. But then one person, they didn't understand, but they put 3 hours in trying to understand that piece of Gemara. In the world to come, the person who put in that 3 hours is put Elyonim. They're put on top over there for all the work that they put in. And that's the meaning of that Gemara, because it's not just about how much I know, but it's about the yagia. It's about the effort. In Pirkei it says, "Lefum tzara agra," the more effort I put in, the more I'm rewarded for the effort that I put in for the Torah that I learned. And then finally, the Chafetz Chaim, he quotes, says likewise, that at a siyum, we say, "Anu amelim v'heim amelim." We put in work, they put in work. Anu amelim v'kam schar, heim amelim v'inam v'kam schar. We put in work and we get schar, they put in work and they don't really get any schar. What does that refer to? Again, al b'torah anu amelim v'kam schar avur hayagia. That the more work that we put in, again, I might not understand it so well, but if I put in that work and I understand and I try, then that's what it means. Anu amelim v'kam schar. We put in the work and we get rewarded for commensurate to the work that we put in. So again, this is, I know it's a halachic shir, not a Shabbos morning sermon, but I thought these were really nice ideas that Moshe Sherbrooke did actually include in a halachic piece over here about defining what a Talmid Chacham is. A Talmid Chacham isn't simply someone who is just naturally intelligent. Some people are born with higher IQs. Some people have proclivities for mathematics. Some people have proclivities for STEM. Some people have for literature and the arts, whatever it might be. I was never a good math student, but Hashem doesn't recognize us by the result, but Hashem recognizes us about the effort that we put in to get there. So that's the point that he makes. Okay. Can I take any ideas or questions on that? We are running low on time, so I would guess if you one question per person at this point. Anyone who hasn't asked any questions yet? Lloyd.
Yes, Rabbi, isn't it also important is not how much you know, but rather how you apply the knowledge that you have? I was always taught that it was more important to apply what you know. That when you reach the pearly gates, the question is, what did you do for society in your lifetime?
Absolutely right. Those are the kind of questions that we have to be ready to answer. Though I guess I'll just take the opportunity. I'm not sure if the gates will be pearly per se, as far as I know, but that might be from a different tradition. Actually, I was sitting around with a bunch of people at a bonfire recently, like a young guys get together, and one person said to the other person who was being very judgmental. He turned to me he wanted me to give Muslim guys, like, look, we're like Rabbi Kurtz would probably tell you, as it says in the good book, don't judge lest ye be judged. And I was like, yeah, it's not in our good book though. It's in the Gospels. And then sure enough, we looked it up, and I think it's in Matthew. So was it Matthew chapter 7? I don't remember. So yeah, even that. So it reminded me actually one time I was an undergraduate student. We went on like a mission to Israel, a solidarity mission. So we met with the president of YU at the time. I'll let you do the math and figure out who it was. And very lovely fellow. So he was, giving us words of chizuk and encouragement. And he said to us, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And I was like, wait a minute. I pull out my phone. I type in the words to Google. I was like, yeah, that's the Gospels. So, you got the president of a Jewish institution quoting the Gospels to give us chizuk. Look, that's Torah Mata right there, right? We believe in taking the religious and the heretical and putting it together. All right. Okay. Now, I guess let's try to just wrap up this section, and we'll start. I guess it will be a 3-part series at this point, because next week, God willing, next week, well, it'll be fun. We're going to talk about how you refer to rabbis from non-Orthodox denominations. You see, we're building up this entire framework for, conditions for within, people who are religiously committed, who are following halacha properly. We have all these rules for who gets titles and who doesn't. Now imagine what happens when we have to extrapolate and apply these conditions and these parameters to people who aren't even keeping halacha the way it's supposed to be. So that, God willing, I'm just whetting our appetite now. God willing, that's what we're going to talk about at the beginning of next time. But let me just wrap up what we have here right now. Look at source 16 with the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim, similar to last time, is very concerned. It's a different section, but same idea. So what's going to happen? I'm going to read this piece from Rav Henkin. I'm going to read it about how rabbis are just Meturgamanim. I'm going to read this piece from Rav Sternbuch about how, I'm going to look at that rabbi there and say, hey, I saw that rabbi in the golf course this past Sunday. He's not Yagea B'Torah. He's not sweating and toiling in Torah all day, so he's not a real rabbi. I'm gonna start saying things like this when I read all these sources from these different prominent, Gedolei Hador. And it might lead me to either genuinely or most times disingenuously find an excuse, a pretext to have some ammunition against that rabbi I don't particularly like, right? I mean, it's an unfortunate reality, but there's not one rabbi that doesn't have people that have something against them, and there's probably we could speak for all of ourselves. There's probably at least one rabbi we've come by in our life that we don't have the fondest opinion about. That unfortunately is just the state of humanity. That's how we work, unfortunately. So the Chavetz Chaim was keenly aware of the human condition, and the Chavetz Chaim writes as follows in source 16. So again, the Chavetz Chaim is talking about the Isser of slandering, so the prohibition of Lashon Hara. And he writes, especially if someone is a posek, who's a halachic leader for the Jewish people, and then you start going around saying, yeah, this guy, I saw him on the golf course this past Sunday. He's not a real Talmud Chacham. First of all, aside from the fact that this is a full-on biblical violation of Lashon Hara, first of all, it's Lashon Hara. Number two, not just as a Lashon Hara, but there's monetary implications here. You're going to make this guy lose his source of livelihood, because who's going to want to have a rabbi who's not really qualified for the position? And then number three, he says, look in the bold, he's going to lose his position completely over it. And then flip the page. This is the kicker right here. And what's going to be the end result of this? That nobody is going to be keeping Torah seriously anymore. Why? After you slandered whoever the Mar Da'asr is, whoever is the rabbinic authority of the area, what's going to happen? Next week, after this rabbi's been duly slandered, he gets up there for the sermon and says, my dear friends, I think halacha is very important. We should consider keeping Hilchos Shabbos. We should keep Hilchos Kashrus, whatever it might be. Then he comes and he gives his evening shir and he talks about the importance of this mitzvah and that mitzvah. But meanwhile, everyone who's sitting in the audience over there who read the slander on Facebook or read the slander in the paper or heard the slander from the Shabbos table the previous week, they're going to be thinking to themselves, do I really need to listen to this guy? Is he really qualified? Is he really a Torah scholar? So in addition to Lashon Hara, in addition to monetary loss of livelihood that you're causing this guy, number three, what you're doing is that think about what you're doing to the whole community. If you go ahead and you say this guy is not qualified to be giving and dispensing psak, ultimately what you're doing is you're causing a bigger lack of observance, and it's an affront to the Torah itself. So even let's assume most people who go ahead and they level this kind of criticism, generally it's in a masla of sorts. It's a pretext of sorts. So what's happening here? What's happening over here? What's happening over here is that what he's saying is, yeah, you know what? Maybe there is a guy. You might not think he's the most qualified, but think about the broader implications. Even if you feel that you're a bigger Talmud Chacham, really you should be the guy giving the sermon. In the end of the day, if you're slandering this guy, people who the community go to for psak, ultimately you're causing everyone else to become less observant. So that essentially brings us to the end of this piece over here. But I want to share just one final source number 18. In source number 18, so there's Dirshu has this Biurim Musafim commentary, just these beautiful new Dirshu commentaries on the Chavetz Chaim, and in their guys, just one moment, please. In their footnotes, they quote all sorts of wonderful poskim, and they sometimes make their own haros. They write, but in the end of the day, but look, in the end of the day, if you know truly, you've asked other people, you make sure it's not just your feud with the rabbi, your inner biases that are coming out, and you realize that this guy really just doesn't, again, he never cracked open a Gemara in his life. He doesn't know what he's doing, and he's possibly being overlifting Mikshel. He's leading others astray by giving them the wrong information. Then mutter l'saperzos im kavanos l'toelis. Then what is the general exception for Lashon Hara? When it's done l'toelis, when it's done for the greater good, for a benefit. Why is it, someone asked me, do I think that this guy should go out with this girl? I think it's a good chef. So why am I allowed to tell the truth? Because it's l'toelis. It's for a greater benefit. That's a built-in dispensation to Lashon Hara. But let's be honest, as you can read in English, source 17, we'll conclude them up, but you can read in English. Rabbi Gil's student points out an article about a similar topic. He says that most people who try to refuse a title, they're not coming from this genuine place of, yeah, you know, I just don't want people to be led astray. I think bad things are going to happen if we follow this guy. Usually there's a feud. Usually there's some sort of underlying bias, and that's generally where it is coming from. So the Chavetz Chaim strongly recommends, Rabbi Gil student, a number of others recommend we refrain from doing so. But that brings us to the end of this section, and God willing, next week we will pick it up with talking about Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, and all the whatever you call it, non-denominational, post-denominational, Rabbinic. How do we refer to them based on everything that we learned? Got to run to Mincha. Yashikach, everyone. Thank you all for coming, and have a good evening.
Good too.